My name is Eric Soloff. I have a beautiful wife and 2 children. I moved to Utah about 2 years ago, coming to Heber in September of this past year, moving from eastern Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia. And this is my story. I was Jewish, but didn't even think that believing in God was a factor, right? That faith wasn't really a component. It wasn't what I was taught. It wasn't what emphasized. It was more about tradition and culture. I want to emphasize that, I didn't have a lot of understanding about even what I was praying. There was no understanding of prayer at that point in terms of what it truly is. That life was meaningless and pointless, and I was totally focused on my own selfish pursuit of happiness and thinking that I could shape that, and should shape that, and it was only about that. And that I always felt different and set apart. I always felt singled out. I always felt like, the token Jew, so to speak, in any given situation. But so I was comfortable with that. And I knew what it was like to stand up and stand out for what mattered to me. But it was certainly incomplete because I wasn't unique and bold and courageous because of my faith. I was unique and bold and courageous because I was different based upon other attributes. And that all was well and good until life got more complicated and I didn't have a relationship with God to lean on that, when I couldn't handle something myself, right? And that really set the stage for me to have a big wake-up call. I accepted Jesus into my life when I was at my lowest breaking point. We had just moved across the country. We had a daughter with no family in the area, no community, and just tons of uncertainty. And my marriage was truly failing. I felt like I was in a desperate, never-ending battle of disappointment where I couldn't do anything right, no matter how hard I tried. I really thought I was giving it my all, and I was just failing, and things were falling apart. Then my daughter had to go in for an MRI for a potentially really serious thing. And my wife was beside herself, and I was truly at my breaking point. I was desperate for a change. I knew I wanted to accept God into my life. I didn't know how to go about doing it, but I knew I needed a mentor that was a believer that wasn't my wife. So I sought somebody out and started learning the foundation of the gospel. I then found out that my son, who was unborn at the time, was potentially going to have muscular dystrophy, and I was just terrified. I was terrified potentially for the loss of his life. I was terrified for the mental health effects it would have on my wife. And selfishly and honestly, I was terrified for the loss of my adventurous and flexible freedom and future that I was, so carefully pursuing and seeking. I knew that a change had to happen. I knew that I needed a relationship with God, and I knew that my incomplete understanding of the Old Testament through Judaism was not enough. I knew that Judaism could bring me rich heritage and culture and tradition, but only Jesus could save me. When I found out my son was healthy, it was probably the first time I was truly willing and open to seeing God acting in my life. Before that, I was open to the possibility that God would act in my life, but I didn't know how to recognize it. And the specific moment where I knew I needed a change and I knew I wanted to pursue that was a real breaking point in my marriage and a big kind of crossroads that my wife and I were at. And I didn't know what else to do, and I felt like it was God or nothing. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, I am powerless at this point. I'm completely powerless. So yeah, there was one specific situation that happened, but it had been a culmination of 100 situations. For me, the evolution was being willing to recognize that I can't do it alone. And then it turned into being able to see God acting in my life, and that God has set the stage for me. Like any Jew, I was raised and programmed to question absolutely everything. So my walk with Christ has been a roller coaster of learning how to have trust and faith. But I can confidently say that now I can see God acting in my life in ways that I never would have understood or even would have admitted before. It's such a long list, but the big ones in our life are: I have 2 healthy children. I have a marriage based upon a foundation where we know how to raise our kids with God at the forefront and have that rock to lean on. I have a permanent home and a growing community of believers around me that has been incredibly encouraging, and I just see God written all over it. I used to be terrified to raise a son. I didn't know what it meant really to be a father or a man, especially when it came to raising a son. I was always more comfortable with a daughter, and I was resentful of my relationship with my father. And now I know exactly who I want to emulate and exactly the kind of father and husband that I want to be. I used to laugh a lot about the idea of Messianic Judaism. I thought, how could a Jew believe in Jesus? What an oxymoron. How ridiculous is that? And man, was I wrong. I now completely understand that God has paired me with the absolute perfect partner, as challenging as it was, and the absolute perfect children, and the absolute perfect set of circumstances to lead me to this destiny, to lead me to where I am today, to be set apart, to be faithful, and to truly learn what it means to be saved by Jesus and have a relationship with Jesus in a way that I am dumbfounded by every day. I am so incredibly thankful for the hardships that I've been enduring, because it's led me here, and now I know that it's my destiny and that God has been patiently shaping me into this point. And I know I'm just getting started.